Hey everybody, welcome to the Script and Style Show, the web show where we talk about web development and the people that make it happen. I'm Todd Gardner from Track.js JavaScript Error Monitoring, and my co-host David Walsh, creator of the popular blog davidwalsh.name. Sorry that we're a few minutes late, everybody. We had a little technical difficulties to get started, but we are online now. David, how's it going?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
That is,
to answer that question, I'm going to take us back to 1991.
Flashback sequence.
A great film was released starring Billy Crystal, Bruno Kirby, Jack Palance, Daniel Stern, Jeffrey Tambor. And in this great movie, Billy Crystal wakes up in the morning, goes to work, and his boss goes, "Hey, how's it going?" And Mitch, Billy Crystal, says, "Do you ever wake up and say, this is the best I'm going to look? This is the best I'm going to feel, and it's not that great?" And Jeffrey Tambor doesn't flinch and says, "Happy birthday, Mitch." Today I am 35 years old, and
you're just a pup.
I feel like that. No, see, when you turn the corner from 29 to 30, you know, like when you're in your teens and you hear 30, you're like, oh God, that's old. Holy, you know? But then when you make that turn from 29 to 30, you're like, nothing's changed. I was in my 20s yesterday. Everything's going good. I'm good. 5 years in, you can't feel like that, especially with two young kids. So like, I'm old. My knees creak when I walk. My ankles are shoddy. 35 is old, man. That's how I'm doing. That's how I'm doing today.
See, well, first, happy birthday. Second, recently I turned 37. So I am officially in my late 30s.
Oh.
So, I mean, that's the thing. You're still in your mid-30s. I'm in my late.
So is that big of a difference?
I don't know. Psychologically, it's different.
Yeah, as you get older, apparently, like the time crunch is like this, where you feel differently about certain years.
Kirk in the chat room says that you should try jogging and say that nothing's changed.
I jog every week at soccer, and I feel like I might fall apart at one point.
All right. Well, we have a guest on today's show, don't we?
We do.
Mr. Tim Thomas, friend of mine. We've hung out at a number of conferences. I've attended a number of his web developer, web designer talks. He's a longtime web designer, the UI architect at a company called Vectra AI. Welcome on the show.
Thanks very much. Happy to be here, and happy birthday, David.
Thank you.
Woo! So we like to kick off the show by, getting off a little origin story. So tell us like a little bit about you and how did you wind up into this crazy thing that we're all doing here on the web, making money?
Right. So I came from kind of a mixed background between my dad was a software developer. My mom was a graphic designer, artist, advertising exec. And
so this is kind of the family business for you.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of growing up, I sort of got it from both sides, and had an opportunity to be exposed to a lot of different viewpoints from each of those. And obviously, my dad was always like, no, you should become a coder. My mom was like, you need to become an artist. I think I still leaned a little bit more toward the coding, but I like to think I can straddle the line a bit. So just kind of through normal, being around them and everyone that they were around, because most of their contemporaries were in the same thing, just kind of picked up programming. And somebody, it was too long ago for me to remember now, but somebody was like, hey, there's this like web thing. You should try doing some coding for it. And this was back like ASP Classic days, I guess. And worked a little bit in that, and then stayed in sort of the .NET-y realm for a while. Was a .NET developer for quite a few years. And then at some point, like I woke up one day, kind of to your point, David, about like, this is the best .NET-y I'm going to be. What else could I do at this point? Right. So I started actually looking into some of the other tech that was out there, because at the time I had been in .NET for, I don't know, 8 years or something. I was like, I still did a lot of web stuff. There's got to be something else, right? and kind of happened upon visual stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, I kind of remember these things from a kid. Like my mom would always, she'd bring me to art galleries and stuff, and like, look at how this painting corresponds to this other one, that kind of thing. And I was like, hey, I can do some of this visual stuff. That's kind of cool. So almost overnight, I became that guy, the one that's like, hey, does this button have the right color? Can you do the advertising for my kids' soccer team? Any kind of designery stuff, like that was me at the jobs I was at. And finally, I was like, no, I got to like join a place that I'm not that guy, right? So I could actually learn some stuff. And spent a couple of jobs trying to find what that really means, and landed here at Vectra, where I do kind of a combination of tech leadership for the coding side. So I do a lot of our front-end dev, mentoring and recruitment, stuff like that. And then I also work pretty closely with our UX group. So I do still a little combination thereof of like the coding and the visual design.
Cool. So you get to ride that fun line of the mix between a little bit of dev work, a little bit of management work, and a little bit of design work.
Yep. And I'm not going to say I ever get those percentages right, but working on it.
Which do you like more? Where do you, if you had the choice of equal prioritized work on all three fronts, which one would you do first?
You're gonna get him in trouble with people in those different groups, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody watches this show. Nobody's watching.
The other thing is, that's what every job interviewer I've ever had has asked. What's your ideal percentages between everything? No, I'm going to refuse to directly answer your question with the consultant answer of it depends. Like there's some days I'm like, I just want to sit down and draw some stuff. And then there are other days when, tech is kind of my thing. So I like to jump around. I think my ideal fixed percentage would be to not have a fixed percentage and be able to just move from one side to another.
That's really cool. I mean, all front-end developers, to a certain extent, really need some user experience work.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not...
Some need a lot of user experience.
Right. But, like, you can't... We're past the days on the front-end side where things can just work, and that's, like, the end of the standard. People... for example, when I was, like, in my early days of agency work... Facebook really lifted the bar in as far as what our customers were expecting, right? They'd be like, well, on Facebook, I just need to click this thing and the page doesn't refresh or anything. It just updates and it animates. And it's like, well, Facebook's spending millions of dollars on engineers to do that. But we're so much further past that. We're a decade past since I noticed customers start. I'm an old fart. Since customers started expecting that sort of thing, right? And the bar's been raised on everything now to where it can't just work. It has to look good at the same time and feel good as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we've been lucky as an industry that we no longer have to spend millions of dollars to get developers to do this stuff. I mean, we have abstractions now that we didn't before. But yeah, I think it's one of the things I used to tell people. So I did software consulting for many years, and I would usually come into a customer and they'd say, "We don't need a designer." I was like, "No, you need a designer." "Well, no, we don't want to pay for a designer," is ultimately what it was. And the only way I could convince them to do that was, you may not think you need a designer, but your app has a design. Whether you like it or not, it's going to be designed in a certain way. Now, that design might be white background, black text, Times New Roman for everything. That is still a design. It is not a successful design for your product in most cases. So you are going to have this anyway. Now is the time to put those resources in. And one of the other great arguments I could use is exactly what you're saying. Like, look at some of the other consumer apps that people use. People just sort of assume that business apps aren't going to look very good. And I think by and large, I don't know, maybe that's correct. I certainly hope that our stuff looks a little bit better than the average, but no one's going to look at a business app and say, wow, this is a really fantastic design. They're going to look at it and say, this doesn't work as well as what I'm used to. I'm used to the Pinterests, I'm used to the Facebooks and the Twitters and all these highly interactive, very refined designs. So we need to do it anyway.
That's awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now?
Yeah, so I mentioned a bit about what I do at Vectra. One of our bigger challenges is so we are a network security software company, and what that means.
So what is that? What does that mean aside from putting up billboards at airports?
Yeah, so we do have some of those now. So what that does for us?
Some billboards at airports.
Yeah,
that's what you have now.
That's what we do.
That's how you know you've made it.
That's right.
You're on Accenture's and Barracuda's radar because now you've taken up some of the airport signage.
Oh, I hope our marketing person's not watching this. I think we're on some of the same billboards as Barracuda and Accenture, actually, because they're all digital right now. So you get your name in the rotation. We recently were named a visionary in the Gardner Magic Quadrant for network security. So that's pretty cool too. I'm pretty happy about that. But so what that means is what our company does is we take some of your network traffic and we can apply some machine learning to it and say, is someone trying to do something bad with your network? Now that's like the 50,000 foot view, but that's this kind of our core competency. And as a result of that, what we get at a lower level is we just get tons of data from it's total fire hose. And yet we need to distill that down into what users most care about. And so there are two big challenges there. One is just the sheer quantity of information that comes in, and it's so specific, and like this port and that protocol and this other thing, this IP address. And we have to actually get it out the other side into something that someone actually cares about. Like they can actually look at, glance at, make decisions about. And one of the ways that we do that is through data visualization. So this is like a big thing. Everybody's got their own data visualizations and stuff. But one of our biggest challenges and where I actually picked up some of the tricks that I'll be talking about today is during the process of trying to take that huge quantum of data and distill it down into something that's easily consumable by people.
So how do you do that? Like,
I'll let you know when I find out.
That's awesome. Like, take this fire hose of data, and there's might be a couple dozen things in that data that anybody gives a shit about, really, and you need to surface those and visualize those. How do you go about doing that?
So we hire a lot of smart people, way smarter than me, and they give me the data after it's been distilled, and then I make it look pretty.
So how do you make it look pretty? How do you? But I guess I'm talking specifically. How do you visualize that?
Yeah, totally.
So how do you show that there was a ton of data here, and here's the 10 things that I think are important in a way that is appropriate, I guess, to say that, like, there was a ton of data here. Most of it you don't care about. I'm not going to show it to you right now, but it's there in case you ever really want to look at it. But here's the things that are really important. Like, what are the ideas that you use to, like, surface that?
Yeah, totally. I'm going to pass the buck on that a little bit. So we actually have a super bright group of data scientists that ultimately give us a lot of that stuff, right? So they're the ones writing the algorithms that take all of that fire hose and say, these are the 10 things, to your point, that look anomalous about this. So this one user never accessed this server in their 5 years of us knowing about them. And then suddenly they've grabbed like 10 gig of data from it, right? I'm not going to pretend I understand any of how that happens. Like I've been in networks before, and I can tell you things like if someone put a log of this user's activity on my desk and said, month 1, 0 data, month 2, 0 data, month 36, 10 gig, like clearly there's something wrong there, right? But how all that happens is totally, A, it's secret sauce, so I don't think I can talk too much about it. B, the recipe for the secret sauce is far above my level of education.
What if they just need to install Visual Studio once and it just pulled all that data from the server?
So that is where we would probably say, like, oh no, it's not 10 gig, it's 500 gig. We know it's Visual Studio levels of but anyway, kind of going back to your question, like we get a lot of that level of detail. So these are the things that we believe are anomalous, and you're correct. We have options to dig down into that and say, go have at it. Actually look at the packet captures, what's everything that's going on. But then our side is that the situation I just described is cool for one thing, right? So this happened once. Well, networks are massive things, and these things might happen 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and that's where we pick it up. And so we are looking more into aggregating these things. How can we find connections between them? So user X downloads 10 gig of data. User Y might have opened up an SSH tunnel into that box so that user X could do it. So trying to connect those things is where a lot of the real magic happens. And then what we do on the UI side is we take that and visualize it. So in this case, we would have nodes that represent all the different systems on your network. We can just draw directed graphs between them and can say things like between system X, system Y, we've noticed these 10 anomalies. And then both of those boxes happen to talk to Microsoft.com. Well, bad example, but because Microsoft's usually not malicious, but to your Visual Studio point, they both talk to Microsoft. So, okay, maybe it is Visual Studio, right? Or it's not that, and it's a domain that's over in Russia or something, and that as a community we have discovered that they're probably not the nicest people,
So what technology are you using to draw these charts and visuals?
Yeah, totally. So our main visualizations are in D3. It's kind of a fairly standard thing, outputs SVG, which is fairly relevant, I think, for the viewers here. It's been a little bit of a challenge for the learning curve, but overall, I think it's worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, I've seen D3 used a lot. The last time that I animated SVG was with a library called Dojo Effects, but that was sort of a long time ago. Outside of D3, like what are our other options for animating SVG? Like I've heard a lot of good things about GreenSock. Is that like an equivalent?
I think it's equivalent in that it is an API for it, but it has different goals, sort of, right? Like D3 is ultimately for exactly what we're doing. So taking data, turning it into live representations that can be interactable and stuff. I think GreenSock's a little bit more toward the micro level of, I'd like some micro interactions. So I want this button to kind of do something cute when you click on it or something. Cute's maybe not the best word. Like I don't mean to downplay what it can do, but it's more for what I might describe as like immersive animations. So parts of apps and websites that contribute to the overall design, theme, that kind of thing, little bounce interactions. Whereas D3 is a little bit more specifically for just visualizing data.
So how, I have to ask, how advanced or what is the scope of some of the stuff that you're drawing? Is it as simple as like a bar chart that animates to a given, percentage? Or are we talking like much larger?
Yeah, so our most complex data visualization is kind of what I described in terms of the network topology. So you might have 50 or 100 different systems on your network, and they're all communicating between each other. And so we just draw that as a force graph. So a bunch of nodes, and there's just lines.
Oh, cool.
Trying to figure out how to draw them so that none of the lines overlap in confusing ways, right? So if you have like 4 nodes on the outside and 1 in the middle, and if they're connected in the like through an X, it might look like that the one in the middle is part of that graph, right?
Oh, sure.
And so then we actually have some pretty cool interactions with zooming too. So you zoom into one node, and we start revealing more information about that because you're actually looking closer into the network. We've based this on some of the diagrams that our customers actually come up with on their own. Like they'll get a printout of all the different systems on their network, and they'll have to go into Visio or something and add them all together. And we started there and tried to figure out what we could do to make that something that we could auto generate, and then actually use the web to expand on that feature set. So, for example, the zoom functionality, you can't zoom on a piece of paper. So we had it so you could zoom out and see a very high level view. Certain things are grouped together, and then you zoom in and get more detail.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. So you have some CSS tricks to show us today. Some of the things you've done to make these graphs and all the pages as part of this thing come together. Do you want to start us off and show us a few things?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get my screen shared real quick. All right, you guys see that all right?
Yes, sir.
I see 2 pink squares. Is that what we're looking at?
That is what we're looking at. All right, go away, Chrome. All right, cool. Yeah, so to give you a little bit of background, one of the things that I've found is a really interesting kind of trick is blending modes, filters, that kind of thing. We'll go into what those are more specifically, but we've really been able to do some clever visualizations and UIs built with some of these things. So I kind of wanted
It's
to give
excellent that you're using CodePen for these demos, by the way.
Oh yeah, all of these are up on CodePen. There's a whole collection. I'm not going to bring up the tab because spoilers, but there's definitely a lot of cool stuff here. So let's get into it. Can you guys still see my video?
I can't see your face, but we can see your screen.
Okay, you know what? I'm okay with that. So I can like put all my weird hats and stuff back on.
Yeah, go for it, man.
This is usually what I look like over in the corner. All right, so
how do you turn animated?
What? Oh, no, that's a network security company, top secret. I'll have to tell you offline. I definitely can't share that. So the first place that I got involved with any of this stuff is with drop shadows. And these days we've got like this box shadow property. That's super cool. Everybody uses it all the time. Less so now that like flat design is becoming more of a thing, or has been for a while, I guess. But when I first started playing around with a lot of these things, we didn't have that, right? But we did have some other options. But let me just kind of go through this. So we've got a couple of squares here. Nothing super crazy. Like there's a container div here. There's a couple of squares that I've absolutely positioned. If I hover over, they'll kind of merge together, which will come into play a little bit later. So let's say we wanted to add a box shadow around both of these together, right? So consider that this is one shape, and we just want to add a box shadow to it, right? All right, cool. Let's go to box shadow. Let's turn that on. Well, we have a problem because now the shadows overlap, right? So maybe this is what we want for the purposes of this demo. It's not. We also have another issue where these shadows actually sort of add together. So once they are overlapping, the shadow is larger than it is if they are by themselves. Right? Maybe a little bit hard to see, but it's a bigger shadow and deeper. But again, we also have the shadow in between them. So maybe we don't want that. Maybe we just want one shadow around the whole thing.
Yeah.
All right, no problem. Let's add a box shadow to the container. And that doesn't really work very well.
No, that's not what we wanted.
No, this is not what we wanted. We still have our animation, which is cool, but the box shadow is around the container element. So definitely not cool. So we have this CSS property called filter, and it will allow us to add some custom functions in. And one of those happens to be drop shadow. So if I add that to it, then hey presto, we have one drop shadow around both of them. And the other part is, since we've added, so the animations here are just CSS, but I can hover over this and you can see it actually animates too, right? Not super performant. I'm not going to say anything I'll talk about today should be used to try to get to 60 frames per second or anything.
Oh, and over, this video broadcast, it's even worse than that. I think you might get 3 frames for the whole animation.
Yeah. If this looks super choppy, it's totally not me. So definitely
blame it on Google.
That's right. Always blame it on Google. So that's cool so far, right? We actually have drop shadow that goes around everything here. When we group these together, then the drop shadow is the same shape and the same intensity as it was on one item, right? So what the browser is doing is composing these things together, and then as a later step, adding a drop shadow to it.
Oh.
Kind of cool. We can also merge a couple of these things together. So let's say I wanted to change the color. So I can add this hue rotate filter, and imagine this is like on a color wheel. So I can change this value, and it's going to change the color that's rendered on the screen. And then I'm going to add a drop shadow on it. And so that will do that, right? So we actually still have underlying these boxes that are in pink, but then now we've decided to make them orange. Fairly straightforward, but this is kind of a cool little set of features that can do some interesting stuff. And
that is really cool. I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah, so unfortunately I had to shift computers for this. Let me bring up, let's see, filter. So the MDN docs are fantastic for this kind of thing. Here we go, filter function. And so these are a couple of the built-in filters that most browsers support. So blur is a fairly common one. We'll actually talk about this a little later. Brightness, contrast, drop shadow, our good friend. Hue rotate we used. So I can actually, let me add this invert one real quick. I need to look up it. I think it just gives a percentage. Yeah. So here's what it looks like over here, right? Also, MDN docs are freaking amazing. Like, I love them. the interaction here is really cool. So I can actually just say invert one. Cool. So let's add this one. And I'm going to add this one to the end here. And then what we'll see is the browser will invert the whole thing.
Oh, nice.
Right?
It even inverted the drop shadow.
Even inverted the drop shadow. Now,
Dang.
if you didn't want that, we'll add it after hue rotate, and it will invert everything that comes before it in the expression, but leave the drop shadow alone.
I didn't know that. That's really
so
cool.
Clever.
There's some really, really cute and cool things that you can do with some of this stuff. So the filter is definitely a pretty powerful one. I believe browser support's actually pretty good on it too. Edge has some issues with using these with SVG, but I think everything else is pretty decent. Not all of them are applied. Like I know Safari has some restrictions on some of the saturation ones, I think. But overall, it's a pretty decent chunk of browser support there.
The funny thing about filter was that when browsers first started using the opacity property, you still needed to use filter. Alpha opacity equals whatever in the old Internet Explorers. So it's really funny. That was like the only time I ever used filter was when I was cursing out the old Internet Explorers to get basic opacity.
Yeah, same. I thought it was like an old thing. I didn't know that it was a new thing too.
So I think that's an interesting point. Now, don't quote me on this. I guess that's a bad thing to say while we're recorded live on the internet. But if memory serves, like a lot of this stuff kind of has its origins in IE for exactly the reason you mentioned. Like IE is like, hey, we control the browser market. Let's add some cool features like opacity in. And then, so yeah, there was the whole, like, what was it? DirectX, DX filter, something or other. And I think a lot of the syntax, at least, if not some of the behaviors, probably harken back to some of those early days. So yeah, this is a cool one. It's kind of neat if you're doing any kind of composing of DOM elements and getting them all stuck together, and then you want to do something out the other side.
That's really cool.
All right.
So can you apply these to like images and stuff too?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this case, we just have a box that's all we've got there, but I can add. You're making me do some live coding, Todd. I'm not sure how.
Danger.
Let's see. Let's do place kitten. See if this works. Nope. What am I doing wrong? Don't tell me it's the semicolon. It's probably the semicolon. There we go. So that was way creepier than I was hoping that would be. So here's our invert function here. So we've inverted this poor cat. Let's get something a little bit less disturbing. There we go. That's a slightly better cat. And of course, we probably won't want the hue rotate too. But anyway, so all of these things will still work the same way. So let's make another real simple one. Let's just blur all of this stuff by like 20 pixels. There we go. Now we've got a nice Gaussian blur effect.
Nice.
We don't have to see that poor inverted kitten anymore.
There was a handy little tip in there for people who might not have been aware of it, that place kittens thing that you used.
Yes, I'm actually using this in a couple of other demos too, but place kitten, give it a width and a height, and it will give you a kitten.
An image of a kitten that you can use as a placeholder anywhere in your application.
What? No, like they actually show up at your house and
what?
That's how I got all my cats, dude. It's called place kitten because they bring a kitten to your place.
Kitten as a service, the latest unsustainable San Francisco startup.
$1 billion startup idea. And of course, this still animates, right? Not great frame rate, but it will still do its business. So that's filter. Don't want to spend too much more time on that one, but it's definitely one of the more powerful options that we have available. We're using this here in CSS, but SVG actually has an XML-based version of this, where right now there's sort of this implicit, you pass the results of one of these filters to another one. Because SVG is XML, like you can actually take the results of one filter and pass it to multiple other filters and then compose them in some very interesting ways. So there's some really cool stuff to be done here.
Neat.
Yeah. All right. So let me move on to mixed blend mode. So here's yet another place kitten.
Ooh.
Yeah, this one's, get used to this one. She will be here for most of the rest of the demos. So 500 by 500 pixel cat picture. We've got a linear gradient on top, and some of my favorite colors to use for design, because no one ever uses deep pink and chartreuse in actual designs. And so if I see these anywhere in my code, I know I probably need to change those. A little trick I picked up a few years ago. So what we've got now is similar to what we just had. So we got a cat and we got a gradient. We can kind of see them overlap here. And what we're actually doing now is what's called a normal blend mode. And that's just the default. If you don't specify anything else, this is what you get. And you've probably seen what this means. So if we like put a box over it, right, it just kind of adds a little bit of tint to it. But we actually have the option of changing the way that this blending is done. So a normal blend mode is just going to take one transparent object and do a basic color addition on it and then give you something out the other side. This is kind of like a linear animation curve, and we have better options. So one of the things that we can do is change the blend mode, which kind of, if you can continue to think about it as kind of an animation curve, it changes the different weights of the color values in the source image and the destination image. Probably easiest for me to just give you an example of this. So I'm going to turn on mixed blend mode color. And so what's going to happen now is the browser is going to take the underlying image and then do some math with it based on the RGB values of the image on top, and then give you the result out the other side. So you can probably see already what's going to happen here. But if I hover these over, you'll see that our normal red background turned from that to deep pink on one side and green on the other. Wow. So this is one blend mode. If you've done anything with Photoshop, Illustrator, there's a ton of these different blending modes. But this is one, I actually use this one a lot for branding purposes. So Todd, you and I were at a conference a few weeks ago over in Norway, and one of the things I love about their branding is they've got these really powerful gradients on everything. Like the Norwegian one's like a teal to a cobalt blue, and every place that they use that, like they if they had an image behind it, they'd have to actually redo that image in Photoshop, basically put the gradient on top, apply these color blending modes. This way, you can do it inside the browser. So if you need to swap out this picture for one of another cat, let's do like that. So different picture. Now I have the same like branding colors, right? Assuming this is my brand over this different cat picture. So super powerful kind of way to make that work there. And it actually looks pretty good too. Like it's totally a not like eye bleeding worthy type of picture that you could have here. And we've got a lot.
Is there like an intensity on it? Like when you showed opacity, you could set it to whatever you wanted. Is there like something like a similar concept here to make the colors more or less intense?
There's an exact concept here. I can just adjust the opacity and it will do blending that way. Yeah, so it's the same opacity thing. So if this was 0, we have nothing on it, right? And then if it's 1, it's full strength. So you can blend it as much as you want. So let's just say we wanted a very slight tint on it. Now it kind of looks like an Instagram filter on this poor cat, but you can mix them that way too.
Is this how Instagram filters work?
So there are some ways that you can get similar results. I would actually say that Instagram filters use the concept of blending modes, but they don't have the same ones that we have. They have their own proprietary ones.
Gotcha.
Just take all the color channels and mix them together. Yeah. That's color. Here's another one that I sometimes use, color dodge. This one's a little bit more dramatic. Maybe this would be a good one for applying a little bit of opacity too. So this is going to brighten up some colors and darken other colors. So it really gives it a more, I'm not sure what filter I would call this actually. Maybe you guys can help me come up with a name for this Instagram filter.
Watermelon.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. The watermelon filter. So that's color dodge. Different one there. Difference is one that we have seen already with, let me actually turn this all the way back up. So this is invert, basically. So it's just find the average or the difference between the colors and basically invert it. So now we've got this really weird psychedelic kitten thing. And again, all this stuff animates fairly well too. These are a little bit better than what we saw with some of the filters, but definitely some interesting designs to be had there. So yeah, that is mixed blend mode. We also have a property called background blend mode that does the same thing with background images, and you can apply it in multiple places. So you have like one background as a gradient, one background in the same element as URL, and then just comma separate them like you can with a lot of other stuff too.
Oh wow, I didn't know you could do that for background. That's neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool little filter options here. And one cool thing about this, I think we might get a chance to talk about a little later, is designers can use these same things. Like if you go to a designer and say, yeah, I'm using a difference blend mode, you can easily go into Photoshop or Illustrator, Sketch or something and set the blend mode to difference, and they will know what you're talking about too. So yeah, that is mixed blend mode.
Cool.
All right, let me move on to a relative newcomer, backdrop filter. Now this one actually came about from WebKit as a result of the new styling in, it was like iOS 7 or something. So where everything has a blurred background on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Apple realized that they couldn't make marketing sites that had that feature on it with the current state of affairs in CSS. So they added a new CSS property that we can now take advantage of. So here we've got cat picture and a transparent backgrounded image. Now this one, so this is SCSS, but consider this as like a color with an alpha channel. You can't do this with opacity, and I'm sure the reasons for that are fairly technical, but you'll have to use like an actual RGBA value with an alpha channel on it. That's all we've got now. Right now, normal blend mode just makes the cat look a little bit pinker. But let me turn the saturate off, and I'll turn on backdrop filter, and you'll see that it blurs what's behind it without changing anything else about the image. So this is like how the blurred background in iOS gets done, at least on the web. And
now, does it have to be applied to this filter over the top of the under image, or could you just move the background filter onto box one?
So what this will actually do is this is a separate compositing layer in the browser. So it will take anything that's behind it and apply that blur to it. Okay. So you could absolutely add the some sort of background blur to box one, for example. The benefit of this one is, as we see here, like animations too, right? Or if you've just got something that's like a scale mode on your background image, you may not know exactly where the different blurs are going to line up. And so it might be that your cat's face is on a different set of coordinates on the image. And this is just kind of a shortcut for figuring some of that stuff out. So there's that one there. Now, backdrop filter, as it is a filter, you can still do everything else that you can do that we already saw with filter. So I can invert this, and then we see we've got an inverted backdrop filter. So this one's pretty cool too. I kind of like this sort of effect. Not sure it's for everybody, but it is definitely a cool little feature. Now, browser support is fairly limited on this. Safari is the only one that actually has it sort of enabled by default. You can turn it on Chrome. The last I checked, which was a couple of months ago, Chrome had some rendering issues with it. And then I think everybody else is like, no, we're not implementing that anytime soon. So use this one sparingly, but it is kind of a cute little approach. And if you're doing something, like if you're building an app with PhoneGap or something where you know that all of your users are going to be on Safari, it becomes a little bit safer to use.
That's really neat. One thing that I've always found weird about my line of thinking in web coding is that I get annoyed when a given browser implements, or historically I've gotten annoyed when a certain browser implements their own spec before it becomes like a global spec. But with CSS, I don't really feel that way, right? Like something like this is a really cool, in my opinion, value added. But if you don't have something like this in all browsers, I don't get upset about it. Why is that?
I think in this one at least, like this isn't hopefully going to degrade your experience if a user doesn't have this feature, right? And in fact, I think even on Apple's own site, they've started doing away with some of this. I think I would. I actually feel the same way. Like it used to really bother me a lot, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. You know, it'd be nice if everyone implemented that. Which is don't tell myself of 20 years ago when I was like, oh, these stupid browser vendors and their inconsistencies. But I would say, you know, if this comes up, something like this, don't use it for mission critical stuff. Like if your whole app is inverting and blurring cat pictures, maybe don't use this approach.
But if you're inverting cat pictures just for fun and you know, some sassy style on the side, you know, go nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Go nuts. Go nuts.
Neat. That's really cool.
Yeah. All right. So I've got one more kind of big one. And this one's a lot more colorful than we had before. Same general principle. So we've got a couple of squares and we can animate them here. Now this is kind of the meat of the whole thing. Everything's been building up to this because so far, honestly, like I can be honest with myself. The things so far are cool and they're interesting, but they're not, like I said, mission critical, right? You're not going to take the color stuff and apply it to a picture. That's sort of a convenience method for the web. It's not going to replace having a designer. This is one of those things where all of these things come together and you can actually do some pretty clever things with it. So we've got here, again, same scenario, a couple of boxes. I've applied some black box shadows to them. So let's say that our designer came to us with a challenge. It's like, well, our company logo is one box and then like another box flies out of it, but it's only the lines of the boxes. So what we could do is we could come in here and make our box shadow like white. And then we could make the background transparent. I can spell. And it's like, all right, cool. That's not working. It's demos. It's time for the important directive. I don't have time to code properly on a demo. So it's like this, right? And it's like, well, no, that's not really it because one of the boxes needs to be behind the other box. Okay, designer, fine. Let's see what we can do with this. So this is where our blend modes can come in really, really handy. So let's take these two and let's apply a multiply blend to them. So what's going to happen now is everything that is black on our source image is going to be black on the output image, and everything that's white on our source image is going to be transparent on the output image. And what this means is we can now have this animation where like one box is flying out of the other one, even though these two things like they're overlapping, and so by all accounts, like we should be able to see this one box behind the other one. So we're representing the transparency here with a blend mode that allows us to ignore the color white, which is what the boxes are filled with. So another way to look at this is let's do mixed blend mode screen. So this is kind of going to do the opposite. So anything that's white is going to be completely white on the other side. Anything that's black is going to be completely transparent. And here again, I can hover over this and like you can see the animations and stuff here, right? Can you imagine trying to do this with, I don't know, CSS path animation or something? And where this really shines, like if we had a solid background, not a big deal. We set the background to the boxes to whatever that color is. But if we've got an image background, or in this case, we've got our gradient, then we can't do that. It's going to be super, super obvious if we just made both boxes deep pink, for example. Yeah. This is a great way of blending all of that together, literally, so that you don't see the outlines, but they still sort of interact with the background. So this is one of my favorite little techniques to use. I've used this on a couple of different apps, and it works out fairly well.
That looks really fun. We have a question from one of our listeners. So Luciano thinks that this is all beautiful and useful, and appreciates all these demos. They have a question of whether invert one filter flips the colors for background colors of child elements, and what happens when a background is set with important.
So I don't know anything about the important. I try not to use that, honestly. I'm really I did it here because it's the, oh crap, the demo's not working. Let me add a bang important.
Isn't that why everybody uses important? Like, oh crap, this isn't working. Let me scatter some importance in it to hit a deadline.
Exactly.
It's to overwrite third-party third-party CSS utilities.
Yes, unfortunately. But so that aside, could you repeat the first part? I want to make sure that I understand that.
They're asking, does the invert filter flip the colors for background colors of child elements?
All right, so that would be. Let's actually go back to one of these, and I'll run this and test. I probably don't want to save any of these changes. All right, so let's actually say that this box 2 is going to be, let's just add that one as chartreuse. Okay, so if we applied the filter of invert onto this top thing, then it's going to apply to everything under it, right? Now, if we put some text in here, show up, there it is. Okay, good. And then just apply this, so we'll take that off, everything else inverts. And then if we apply it just to box 2, you'll see that it does, right? So it'll be all of that stuff. Now, I think there was a part of the question about a background image too.
Yeah, does the invert filter flip the colors for the background colors of child elements?
Okay,
was the text.
I think I understand what that's asking, and that would be, let me get rid of this then, because I added the chartreuse onto it. Nope, that didn't work. You know what it's time for.
It's that time again.
It's that time again. Okay, so we do have it on that element, and then if we added it back on the container, I think if I'm understanding correctly, I think this is what was asked. Yes, it'll invert the whole thing. And the reason for this is what the filter does is, again, it kind of takes all of the stuff that's in this element and grabs it out into a separate rendering context, does all of its work there, and then gives it back to you. So anything that's under here, like it doesn't matter what content it is or what pixel values are there, then it should actually handle it fairly. I think this is pretty accurate. Like, this is what I would kind of expect for that to do.
Awesome. I think that answered Luciano's question.
Cool. Awesome. And
so those are some sweet demos.
Yeah. So I've got one more demo. If you guys have time,
let's do it.
This is going to be the big one. This is the culmination of all the things. Please, 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 please don't ever do this, because this is horrifying, and I'm not even sure why I did this exactly, but it had to be done. So let me decompose this a little bit, because in all honesty, I think this shows some really cool parts of this whole technique. So I've got a container. Everything here we've already seen before. I've got some animations on it, obviously.
I love that you're just using the Unicode characters for this. This is epic.
Exactly. So sort of related to the question that was asked, like, it doesn't matter what the pixel values are, the browser will figure it out. So I'm using a normal like cat emoji and a spiral emoji, and then the filters can figure out what color paths need to be modified, and then actually make changes there. And one thing I discovered as part of preparing this demo, I did not realize you could add text shadow onto emojis, and it would like follow. That's what these things are, right? So it's following the outline of the cat and the spiral.
Oh, Tim, this is ridiculous.
Don't do this to anyone listening.
Well, why not?
Please don't do this.
I'm totally going to put a poop emoji with shadows and spinning on it. This is going to happen.
That's the PubConf 404 page now, right?
It soon will be.
So don't do this. Maybe I should be more specific. Don't do this exactly. But I do think there's a lot of experimentation that you can do with a lot of these things. Play around with it. Add text shadows. Add blend modes. Add filters. Change the order of the filters. See which one goes first and what it does to stuff. One of my favorite things about CSS is just how playgroundy it can be. Just play around with it. Come on to CodePen. Like I said, all of this stuff is up on CodePen. There's actually a whole, here's the whole collection here. It's that URL up there, XVX.
Can you drop that in our chat so I can share it out?
Yes. So this will be up there. It's actually up there right now. Let me stop my screen share, and then I can. How do I stop my screen share, guys? That do it? All right, cool.
Boom.
So yeah, CodePen link is in group chat.
I will take it on the rest of
All right, cool. But yeah, all of those are up there. Feel free to fork them if you want to play around, change it with your own emojis and stuff. And I'd love to, like, anyone that sees this and gets inspired to play around with stuff, I'd love to see what you guys are doing with it.
Awesome.
That's really neat. I feel like a couple of years ago, if you would have shown me that, number one, I would have cringed the same way we did today. But number two, like I would have expected to see Canvas done or similar technology. But the fact that we can do this with CSS now, I didn't realize that we were that far with blend modes.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. Now, I'm glad you mentioned Canvas. I'm not sure that we'll ever get to a point where CSS is at the same pace as like Canvas and WebGL and all of that stuff, because I just get the feeling that a lot of the CSS properties are things that have been pulled out of elements like Canvas. It's like, oh, we use this all the time in Canvas. Let's make a CSS rule for it.
Right.
I'm not sure that relationship's going to change anytime soon, but I'm super happy that we have some of these options now, and browser support's decent. And we can actually use them to build some cool stuff.
Absolutely. One thing I want to call out from there, the animations and blend modes and stuff are really cool. But you said something that was really important, and you demoed it within your demos, is that picking a consistent debug color can be a huge, huge help. And the fact that you've used deep pink is really good. One thing that I do to see my dimensions when I think there's a problem in my CSS is I'll use a background color of pink, for example, right? Because you can't miss it. You either see pink there or you don't. And I think that what's cool about you using deep pink actually is that you can write a commit hook or something to look for deep pink in a change and prevent that from making it into your commits on like console.log, which apparently I've yet to figure out how to stop committing that first. But that's actually a really, really, really cool tip that people should keep their eye on.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. And if you're using a browser that supports CSS variables, another great place is to use it in that too. Like override some of your variables, set the color to deep pink, and then you can see how that interacts and cascades down your sites. So thanks.
Why no love for chartreuse?
I had some.
As a more general question, like over the past couple of years, we've really seen SVG take off. And I don't mean in as far as capability, I just mean as far as usage, right? For maybe some of the people who work more with JavaScript than CSS or assets or whatever, why is SVG finally getting some like prominence? Why is it taking over?
I wish I knew, because I've been trying to tell people to use SVG for a long time, and everyone sort of laughed at me. And so I wish I could.
That's not why we were laughing at you.
Well, it's not why you're laughing at me. You have plenty of other reasons. And so I wish I could go back to him and be like, no, like this is why you were wrong, and you should buy me drinks and stuff. Which that part you can totally do, Todd. I definitely think that browser support was a big one. I mean, and unfortunately, some of the stuff we even talked about today, like the filters thing, doesn't really work super well on SVGs in Edge even. So I think we still have a ways to go on full browser compat on some of this stuff. But I think it's the types of interfaces that we build are changing. Like if you go back to the early days of the web and everything was documents, if you tried to talk about, hey, there's an XML-based language that lets you position graphical elements wherever you want, you just get laughed out at the 1990s or something. But now that we've got, and again, kind of going back to earlier, like a lot of these consumer apps that aren't using the web, that are built with native technologies, can push that envelope. It's up to us to, I'm not going to say follow, because I think there's a great opportunity for the web to be right out there in front. Like I don't think that the web is held back at all, but we still have this expectation that we can make apps that look and behave like their native counterparts. And one of those benefits that native apps usually have is like better graphics handling, right? So you can do 3D animations right there inside of your app on your phone. Well, we didn't really have that on the web. Now we do, but I think part of it is it's kind of a catch-up thing in that regard. I think it's becoming easier for people to make some of these SVGs too. Like
Right.
A lot of the workflows that I used to use was when I would make SVGs, I would sit down with a text editor and like a reference guide of the SVG
Right.
next to me. Like, well, I need to put a box on the screen. All right, let's see. So open path D equal. No, that's not right. I could probably use rect for this. And now we've got so many apps that will generate directly to it. I use Illustrator, Photoshop. That's kind of my stack. They do a really great job. And in fact, if you add a blend mode into Illustrator and export it as an SVG, it will keep that blend mode in CSS too. So you can actually say like style equals mix blend mode, so-and-so. Inkscape, I think, is the tool that uses SVGs as its native format. Like you just hit file save and it saves an SVG. So it's a lot easier to get these things out for the web too.
Rest in peace, VML, right?
Oh man, wow. I hadn't thought of that. And whew.
So one thing I wanted to add, along with a lot of the apps that generate SVGs, they'll often like leave a bunch of goo in the SVG markups that sometimes makes them quite large. There's a tool I've used out on GitHub that Jake Archibald put together. I'll drop a link out in the chat. It's the SVG OMG optimizer. So it's the SVG's missing GUI that allows you to basically paste a bunch of markup and then like update and edit and remove like a bunch of like extra notation and spacing and stuff like that, so that you can really crunch SVGs down for production use.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great tool.
So what, if anything, are SVGs kind of still lacking for you? Like what do you want to come next?
I want Edge to add all the cool stuff that we can do in other browsers.
Oh, you're just hating on Edge.
Well, no, I mean it's added some cool stuff, but that's like that's the biggest reason why I can't do what I kind of advise people not to do, and that is just go crazy with some of these UIs. Like I would love to be able to use filters in some of the UIs that I'm building, but not with Edge right now, right? Not to hate on Edge. They don't have the support there yet. Sure, they're working on it. Like I certainly don't want to be the one to actually build that feature in. I cannot imagine how complex all of this stuff is actually under the covers. But that's kind of the short-term thing that I'm hoping to come out of it. The longer-term thing is adding some more features that we can see in graphic design tools. So the background blend mode, like I think, would be a great thing to expand a bit. Like we don't have an easy way of doing backdrop filter in SVG. We don't have a great way of doing it in CSS for most browsers either. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see things like different types of gradients. These are things that graphics tools have had for years. Like you can do box gradients and conical gradients and radial gradients, and we only have a couple of those available in CSS and SVG right now. Those are kind of the big things. We've got some great new things coming out of graphics toolkits, and I'd just like to see maybe to kind of meta this up a little more communication between the SVG working group and graphics tool manufacturers.
Cool. Well, hopefully we can see all that happen in the months and years to come.
Fingers crossed.
All right. I think that's our list of topics for the day. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so.
All right.
Tim's a brave man for demoing, live demoing visual.
Yeah, this is
visual
our
elements.
first live demo that we've had, isn't it?
Hey.
I think so. I don't remember having one.
Well, I hope I have appropriately set the bar with the spinning cat emoji.
I mean, I don't know that we'll ever quite surpass that. That's pretty harsh. All right. So how we typically end this is we'll kind of go around and each say like one big takeaway that we think was particularly cool, and kind of wrap up the show. And we let the guests go last and plug anything else they want. So I'm going to start with you, David. What was your big takeaway?
Well, my big takeaway, I have two. The first one is that I forgot to say the name of the movie I quoted at the beginning, and that is City Slickers. Very good movie. Number two, though, for the longest time, as a front-end developer, I felt, what's the word? Just sort of thankful for when designish things were added to CSS, like opacity, right? That was like a big moment for us in a way. But watching this and not being a developer, and not being a designer, I feel like I've come around to expecting these things now. They're not just nice to haves. When Tim brought up the sort of history of, oh shit, we want to change the design, so now we need to cut a bunch of new images. I know that pain. I remember that pain. And so here in 2018, it's not good enough that we hope and say, oh, one browser's doing it. We need to expect these features that we've traditionally thought of as design Photoshop features in the language, that we can do this dynamic stuff. It can be done. There are more resources being thrown into browsers than ever. You know, we need this stuff.
I love it.
Yeah, it's so hard to get out of sticking with the theme of me being very old. You know, I was there for the decade that it seemed like web development didn't advance. You know, like IE wasn't adding new JavaScript. You know, CSS, everything was coming so slowly, and now that it's not like that anymore, it's still hard to get out of that mindset. But we need to get out of that old mindset to be able to push the web forward. How about you? What did you learn today?
Well, the whole filter thing was new to me. That I didn't know about any of that capability. That's all super cool. But the part that I am particularly going to use, I already have like 2 different use cases in mind, is applying those filters to emoji. I mean, that's just going to happen, either on a Trek.js site or a PubConf site or on a marketing site or somewhere, somehow. That is going to happen, probably later today.
I like it.
All right, Tim, you get the final word. What is your big thing and anything you want to plug?
Yeah. So I think honestly, my big takeaways were not too dissimilar. So first, I need to go back and watch City Slickers. I have not.
Obviously, yes. Thank you.
Far too long. I'm pretty sure another takeaway is I think Todd still owes me a beer at some point. I'm not sure why, but I feel like that's probably a thing.
That's a good slip that in there. Nice.
And now it's recorded. Like everybody has seen it. I honestly think so. As I was researching some of the demos for today, I was also taken aback at how much we can do now. Like honestly, I was expecting to have to go crazy with browser vendor prefixes, which you should always use like an auto prefix or something. But filter is not one of those. You don't have to use that. There's no like WebKit filter anymore. And so the browser support is really, really jumping on this. And I think it does speak to a deeper issue of we are raising the bar for what our interfaces and how we experience software. And as I said, like the web, I think, has gotten a bad rap historically for being far behind native apps. And sure, there are some things that we'll never be able to do quite as soon as native apps have those capabilities. But we're closing that gap. Like we're able to do a lot more that designers are thinking about. And ultimately, I think one of the things that I love about this industry is being handed a problem and I'm like, I have no idea how to solve this. Let's try to figure it out. And I think all of these things that we've talked about today are just new tools in that toolbox. When a designer hands you this strangely colored emoji for some reason, after saying, what the hell are you thinking? You can say, actually, I know how to do that now too. And I think that's kind of the thing that always surprises me is we like to rail on browsers for being behind, but there are plenty of places where they're all definitely catching up.
Well, that's awesome. I think that's a perfect end to a good show. We're just over an hour, so I think it's time to close it up.
Cool.
Thanks so much, Tim, for coming on the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. We'll be back next week, probably a little bit later. We might be pushing our start back by an hour. on deck, I think we're going to have Mr. Scott Helm come on the show and talk about content security policy and web security in general. So that should be a good show. Until then, thanks so much. I'm Todd Gardner and my co-host,
David Walsh.
See you next week.